As we all know, perfect horizontality in relation to the water's surface reduces resistances and breaks to a minimum. What we don't talk about so much is the 4 essential principles to achieve this. Firstly, to spend as little energy as possible so as to redistribute it towards propulsion, and secondly, drastically increase your level of sensation so as to enjoy the process. So the first principle for better horizontality is to align yourself from head to toe with the nape of the neck flat and to achieve a shape that resembles a water droplet. That's the alignment. And what does the droplet shape mean? The principle is to be a little wider here at shoulder level and then to form a sort of triangle. The pelvis a little less wide than the shoulders, the feet even less wide so that the water flows more easily over the body and so that the brakes and resistance to forward movement are even more reduced. So, to get a better feel for it, we'll use our hands and forearms as a tactile key point on the surface, starting with passive surface glides. If you're a bit more expert, you can also do passive underwater glides. Then the idea is to have this reference point. You can also do it out of the water with, well, an alignment simply on a wall because a wall, well, it's aligned by definition. And the surface of the water is exactly the same thing. The second principle for being more horizontal is to make yourself taller both forwards, from the flat nape here and backwards to the toes here. Why self-lengthening? Because, well, first of all, it's going to help you align yourself better, that's for sure. But also the fact that you're making yourself taller, well, it's going to give Archimedes more points of contact to maintain this horizontality in relation to the surface of the water. So, whatever your size, the key thing to remember is that the more self-extending you are, the more you'll be able to keep your heels close to the surface. A good exercise for this can be the passive surface or underwater glides, or simply letting yourself float on the surface of the water, but only if you can keep your arms and forearms on the surface, because aligning your arms and body is essential if you want to float without moving. The third principle is to search for immersion. Why? Because firstly, it cancels out wave resistance if you're swimming on your own in a pool like here, the resistance is on the water's surface, and secondly, by submerging the front of your body where there's air here, you'll make sure that behind that part of your body, it will inevitably rise. There's a pendulum effect. Pushing down the chest brings the heels up towards the water's surface. And a good exercise for this is the wooden stick exercise. The idea is to start from a completely vertical position, and then, by lowering your head and moving your arms forward, try to horizontalize as much as possible, in fact, to bring your pelvis and feet towards the surface. So if you float well, if you're well aligned, you're bound to succeed, well, as I'm doing here, in making sure that, well, the magic happens so that the body's position rises towards the water's surface. So one thing to focus on is really trying to open up this part of the rib cage to get the lungs in the right position to float as much as possible. It may be the heels on the surface, it may be a little less, it doesn't really matter. The idea is to really feel a minimum of this tilt and then reproduce it in a full swim in freestyle, because ultimately it's the shape of the body that gives the desired orientation. So the horizontality. This means that if I wanted to tip over onto my back, well, I'd look up at the ceiling and swing my arms quietly along my body towards the other side, towards the back. And so to get a better feel for these sensations of immersion, focus number 1. And this is what 80% of my students feel, is to feel the water flowing over the nape of your neck, the water flowing over the top of your back, provided, of course, that your neck is aligned and flat. But the fact of submerging yourself means that you're going to get a good feel for this thing, and you're really going to increase your sensations in this area. The second focus will be to have the sensation of swimming downhill, because you'll have put your head back on a little flatter and lower, so your brain will be saying, ooh, I'm a little deeper in the water, so you'll really get the impression in your brain that you're swimming with the front of your body, your head a little more tilted than your heels, which will be towards the back on the surface. The third focus will be to feel your feet, your heels, touching the surface of the water with every leg kick, every time you reach the top of the kick. The last sensory landmark will simply be the fact of immersing your head in the water, hearing nothing or hearing everything that's going on underwater, rather than what's going on outside the water. So, the simple fact of working on these 3 principles to become more horizontal will mean that we'll expend less energy because we'll use our legs even less. And mechanically, we'll need our legs less to balance, to maintain horizontality, but I'll come back to that later. The fourth principle is to remain undeformable. Undeformability is the ability to keep horizontal despite acceleration of the arms, despite inspiration, despite arm recovery. So, to maintain 1, alignment, 2, self-lengthening, and 3, immersion. Because in the end, body roll, stroke acceleration, and inspiration undermine these 3 principles, as well as the master principle, horizontality. And so, undeformability will resolve this problem. It's a kind of dynamic core stabilization, a dynamic sheathing, in spite of the movements you have to make to move forward. To work on this principle, the best exercise is undoubtedly the dive and glide, with or without a push. It doesn't matter. As you can see in this video with Caleb Dressel, who managed to do 24.90 meters like that just by pushing off the blocks. If you don't feel like it or don't have the time to learn the dive, what you can do is simply fall. Because what's the point? It's to have an impact with the water to reinforce this undeformability. Basically, if you go off in all directions after the impact, you won't get far. If you manage to keep your body line, your alignment, you're bound to be able to glide. So, work on this on the start or the fall as you want. It's the same thing. It's the same principle. You'll be able to glide much further and then put it back into your stroke, your freestyle. And so, if we take up this exercise again, the principle, of course, is to first align yourself towards the ceiling, stretch your nape, and stand on your toes, and maintain this as much as possible until you reach the water. The first thing to go in is the head, then the arms. This alone will allow you to glide a little further forward. Unfortunately, these 4 principles won't be enough to maintain 100% horizontality throughout your stroke, throughout your freestyle. The kick, as I mentioned earlier, is there to help maintain horizontality. However, the more the other 4 principles are acquired at 80%, 90%, or even 100%, the less the kick will be required to keep the body in the desired orientation, that is parallel to and below the water surface. What's a good kick? 2 things. First, it's a mobile ankle in extension, and it's also toes pointing inwards. So, toes towards the inside. This involves an internal rotation of the leg to put the tip of the foot towards the inside, to have even more contact area with the water to push at the bottom of the pool. Action-reaction. So the feet rise towards the surface and help to keep the body horizontal in spite of what happens on the rest of the body, the shoulders engagement, the stroke acceleration, and the inspiration. And so, to facilitate this posture, what you can do is simply put the toes in contact, or even one on top of the other when you glide after push-off. Moreover, the idea is that with each stroke of the leg, you can feel this crossing, this contact, so that you can be sure that the tip of the foot is pointing inwards, and so that you can make a more and more effective kick to maintain the horizontality of the body. Last but not least, I wanted to talk to you about the roll, the cornerstone of an efficient freestyle. What does the body-shoulder roll enable? Well, being on edge, close to 90 degrees, gives less drag. The more frontal and flat you are, the more resistance you present to the water flow. The closer you are to 90 degrees, the less resistance you present to the water, and the less surface area you present to the water. The roll starts from the kick. By pushing with your feet, this will help you to tilt toward the other side with sheathed hips to transmit the movement of the foot to the upper body. The best drill linked to this key point is to put your hand palm toward the sky and stretch your arm far ahead to engage your shoulder. Over time, by working on the mobility of the ankles in parallel, you will succeed in tilting your body at 80, 85, 90 degrees to get as little forward motion resistance as possible. As you train, your kick will become more and more synchronized and automated with your arm stroke, just like your arms became synchronized when running or learning to walk. So I hope you'll focus on these 4 principles plus one bonus principle, the kick, and work on them step by step, one after the other, to bring them into alignment with your freestyle. Because, as Raymond said, the projectile body must be built before the propellant body. I'd be inclined to tell you that you have to build your boat before putting in the oars, or that your boat must always be one step ahead of your engine because a deflated Zodiac won't go very far and will run the engine dry very quickly.